Greetings, geometry gurus. It's that time again, time to study for the summative test. So remember, I don't want you to take your blank summative review and just fill in as I go along. I want you to try the problems first, then check your answers with my answers. That's the best way to study for this test. So let's take a look at 1 through 6. Determine which triangle is congruent to the given triangle and state the reason for congruence. If congruence cannot be determined, write not possible. For the first one, we know that BD is congruent to BD by the reflexive property. So the two triangles are congruent. Make sure you match up your variables. Triangle ABD is congruent to triangle CBD, and that's by side, 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 because we have 3 pairs of congruent sides. For the second one, I do know that angle MON is congruent to angle QOP by the vertical angles congruence theorem. However, angle is not a valid theorem, so it's not possible. The next one, you have to pretend that the two triangles are not overlapped. For JFG, notice that we have our shared side by the reflexive property. We have one angle by the angle addition postulate, angle HFG and angle JFH make up angle JFG. And then this angle here, FGJ, has 1 hash mark on it. The second triangle, triangle HGF, is congruent because we have the same angle here with 1 hash mark on it. This angle, which is congruent using the angle addition postulate and substitution, and then we have our congruent side. So FGJ is congruent to GFH, and that's by angle side angle. Moving right along, triangle DFE and the other triangle are not congruent. We're only given 2 pieces of information, 2 pairs of congruent sides, which is not enough to prove that the triangles are congruent. The next one, triangle ZYX, is congruent to triangle ZVW, and that's by side, angle, side. For my very last triangle, use the fact that CD and AB are parallel. Draw your Z for Zorro. And I know that angle CDB is congruent to angle ABD by the alternate interior angles congruence theorem. Therefore, triangle DCB is congruent to triangle BAD by angle side angle. For number 7 and 8, use the given information to complete the statements. Remember, it's very important to match up C with D, A with O, and T with G. I'm going to complete 7 and 8 for you. For number 8, we have angle ONM is congruent to angle RQP. Next, line segment QR is congruent to line segment NO. Angle O is congruent to angle R, and then triangle QRP is congruent to triangle NOM. Flow proofs. Start with your first piece of given information, that line segment AD is perpendicular to line segment CB. And the reason is given. What's special about flow proofs is the arrows show how one reason leads to another. So since AD is perpendicular to CB, I know that angle AD is congruent, angle CD FDA is congruent to angle BDA. And the reason is that they're both right angles. Right angle congruence theorem. To fill in my next box, notice that nothing comes before it. So that means that we don't need to know anything else to get whatever goes into this box. I'm going to put my second piece of given, that line segment AC is congruent to line segment AB. My reason is given. Be sure to mark your diagram as you go along. Let's see, AC and AB. My third and final piece of information is using the reflexive property. I know that line segment AD is congruent to itself by the reflexive property. You'll notice that all three of these arrows are pointing to this box. So we'll use these three to tell us that triangle CAD is congruent to triangle BAD, and that's by side. Oh, actually it's by hypotenuse leg. Hypotenuse leg. Because it's a right triangle, we know that the hypotenuse and a leg of one right triangle are congruent to the corresponding hypotenuse and leg of the other right triangle. Lastly, I can say that CD is congruent to DB, and the reason is because corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. For the next question, we're going to be completing a two-column proof. Make your T-chart and head the top of the left column, statements, and the top of the right column, reason. I start by writing down my two givens, that XZ is the bisector of line segment YW, that's given, and angle XZY is congruent to angle XZW, also by given. Using the reflective property, I know that XZ is congruent to XZ by the reflexive property. And then this piece of information, XZ is the bisector of YW. That means that line segment YZ must be congruent to line segment ZW. YZ congruent to ZW, and that's by the definition of segment bisector. At this point, we have enough information to prove that the two triangles are congruent, and that's by side angle side. But wait, we haven't proved our last step yet. XY is congruent to XW because corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. For the next question, it says complete a flowchart, two-column, or paragraph proof. I'm going to choose to do a flowchart proof, but then whenever I'm done, I'll clear the screen and I'll put up the two-column proof if that's what you chose to do. So take a look at what I did. I started with my first given, that EG bisects angle FGH. That led to the conclusion that these two angles must be congruent, angle FGE and angle HGE, by definition of the angle bisector. I also knew that EG was congruent to EG by the reflexive property, and FG was congruent to GH, and that was given. Notice that I didn't connect any of these boxes together. However, these three facts can lead us to the conclusion that triangle FGE is congruent to triangle HGE, and that's by side angle side. Lastly, since corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent, I can conclude that angle FEG must be congruent to angle HEG. Stay tuned for the two-column part. Pause it if you did the two-column proof, and you can check my work with your work. I am not going to do a paragraph proof. I'll do the same thing for these last couple of proofs that I did on the last one. I'll do a flow chart first, and then I'll do a 2-column proof. For my flowchart, or for my flow proof, I start with my 3 given pieces of information. B is the midpoint of AC, BE is parallel to CD, and angle E is congruent to angle D. I've placed my boxes in specific places. Since B is the midpoint of AC, I know that AB must be congruent to BC. And that's by the definition of midpoint. Since BE is parallel to CD, I know that angle EBA is congruent to angle DCB. If you're having trouble seeing why, think of these 2 lines as 2 parallel lines cut by a transversal. You'll notice that those 2 angles are corresponding angles. And that's by the corresponding angles congruence postulate. Whenever I label my final piece of information that angle E is congruent to angle D, you'll notice that these 2 triangles are congruent by angle, angle, side. And then our final conclusion is that BAE is indeed congruent to CBD because corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. Take a look at my 2-column proof if that's what you chose to do. Remember, on tomorrow's test, I may ask you to specifically use one type of proof or another. So be comfortable with both flowchart and 2-column proofs. Last but not least, again, I'm going to start with the flowchart proof. Start with your 2 pieces of given information. PQ is parallel to NM. The reason is given. And then QO is congruent to NO. And the reason is also given. The reason why I put my second box in the next column is because I know that I'm not going to use the fact that QO is congruent to NO to get another piece of information. However, since PQ is parallel to NM, we have a pair of parallel lines cut by a transversal. Alternate interior angles must be congruent. I also noticed that angle NOM was congruent to angle POQ since they're both vertical angles. Now I'm going to use these 3 pieces of information to prove that the 2 triangles are congruent. Just out of curiosity, I'd like to see how many people have watched this video. So whenever you get your test, write the word fish food somewhere on the second page of your test. Anywhere on the second page, just write the word fish food, and I'll know that you took the time to watch my video. Getting back to math, those 3 facts told us the triangle NOM is congruent to triangle QOP by angle, angle, side. And then I could use the fact that corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent to tell me that OP must be congruent to OM. Stay tuned for the 2-column proof. And here's the 2-column proof. Remember to label everything that's congruent on your diagram for full credit on tomorrow's test. If you have any questions, feel free to email me. My email is amy_j_bierman@mcpsmd.org. Happy studying!